brought to you courtesy of the red, white, and blue. I am a real American, fight for the rights of every man. American woman, mama, let me be. Born in the USA.
And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Mr. Eschbacher giving you another one of my kitchen table talks. Today our topic will be the market revolution, or America's first industrialization. This is a topic that's really important for the APUSH test. I've seen essays on it, and later on we can make big time connections with this to period 6 when we talk about the Gilded Age. So, let's get learning here. Alright, first things first, I'm going to need my crack producer John to put a graphic up on the screen, something called the business cycle. Now, the business cycle is an important economic term. You see, our economy operates like a roller coaster, and here in 2022, the roller coaster's been going up and down a lot. Well, that's important because throughout history we'll see these cycles on the business cycle where you go through periods of expansion, increased jobs, increased production, prices are good, people are investing. Eventually everything stops growing and you get a peak. And then you begin to slide eventually into what's called a recession. If that recession is really long and goes really low, then we could get what's called a depression. But usually these recessions bottom off into what's called a trough. And then we just repeat this constant up and down cycle. This is important because we're going to talk about America in this business cycle. America has had its ups and downs throughout our history. Not just, the Great Depression of 1929, not just our economic troubles in 2022. And what, in fact, we see is very often we go through these very sharp declines, which are often known as panics. And these panics have happened throughout history. The big ones are in 1819, 1837, which we'll talk about a lot with Jackson, 1857, which helped cause the Civil War, 1873, 1893, 1907, 1929, which led to the Great Depression, 2008. Okay? So it's important to keep this in mind, that throughout our nation's history we do go through these ups and downs, although historically speaking the trend throughout American history is the economy has grown. Now, what caused this market revolution? What is it? When we use the term market revolution, or sometimes people say early industrialization, or I've even seen the term proto-industrialization, it's the beginning phase of the Industrial Revolution for America. Hopefully you paid attention in Global 10 last year, and you know that the Industrial Revolution began in Britain around 1750 or so. And if you think of it this way, we're just a younger country than Great Britain. So we're going to go through these same things just a little bit later. And it's really going to come down to 4 big changes. For one thing, the use of commercial farming. See, one of the big results of the War of 1812 was we had to grow on our own. The United States had been cut off in foreign trade because of the War of 1812. Even before that, been cut off because of Jefferson's embargo of 1807, because of the British impressing our sailors. So Americans turned inward and said, we've got to start producing, not just to export, but also be able to produce the goods that we need so we don't have to rely on other people. And in the South and in the West, this meant commercial farming. This meant specializing in 1 or 2 crops as a farmer. Now in the South, we've learned since middle school, this meant cash crops. And it looks like my special guest is back. This meant cash crops, things like tobacco, now cotton, okay? And cotton will become the king, the big cash crop of America in the early 1800s. Cotton will become important because that cotton will be shipped overseas to Britain, but it more importantly will be shipped up to the north, to the northern factories. This idea of commercial farming will go out west too, based upon crop prices. Some farmers will specialize on corn, specialize in wheat, certain crops, with the idea that you're not producing from yourself, you are trying to produce large quantities of the crops that get the best prices and ship them to market. Now, this is going to lead to some big changes. For one thing, if you're going to do cash crop or commercial farming, and you're going to sell massive quantities of any type of a crop, whether it's cotton or food, you need huge amounts of land. This will place a big demand on land and lead to manifest destiny. And of course, if I say manifest destiny, you say, go west, young man, go west. It's going to lead to more and more people moving out west in this pursuit of land. In the South, they call this Alabama fever as people begin to move westward past Georgia into Alabama. It's unfortunately going to lead to some rough times for Native Americans because as they push west, they're going to be encroaching on land owned by the Cherokee and other peoples and forcing them off their land. Cotton especially is going to do this because cotton nukes the soil. It destroys the minerals and the nutrients in the soil, and so if you're doing cotton farming, you need more and more and more land. Cotton is going to become the backbone for the southern economy. In fact, the phrase often used was king cotton. Now the reason for this is an invention. Now when I was a student teacher, I'll never forget a guy, Mr. Albright. He was my supervising teacher at the high school I student taught at, and he had a saying that I've always stolen: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, sometimes you mean to do the right thing, you meant to do right, and instead of pouring water, you pour gasoline on the fire. Cotton is very difficult to process. Cotton plants are very fibrous. The fibers are all wound and tangled up. There's seeds in there, and you have to comb it out to get the fibers to relax, to pick the seeds out, straighten out the fibers, spin it into thread. So what really limited how much cotton you would grow was how much cotton you could process. And we'll put a visual up here of Eli Whitney's cotton gin. Whitney invented this machine, the cotton gin, think short for engine, which you could turn a crank and it would comb out the cotton and allow you to process the cotton something like 10 times faster. Which meant if you can process the cotton 10 times faster, you should grow more, which meant it increased the demand for slaves. Whitney makes another invention, which isn't necessarily as evil a result. Whitney is famous for producing what we now call interchangeable parts. If the brakes go on your car, you don't throw out your car, you just get brakes. You order them, and Ford brakes are Ford brakes, and Dodge brakes are Dodge brakes, and it doesn't matter. If your keyboard breaks, if you lose the W on your keyboard, you don't throw out the computer, you get a replacement part. And Eli Whitney invents this system, starts off for guns, where all the parts are interchangeable. Instead of things being custom made, you have parts that are all the same. Now, this is great. It increases production. It makes products cheaper. It's also going to have an effect on workers, because now, if you're just the guy who produces caps for the water bottles all day, you're not that valuable. It's easy to train you, which means it's easy to replace you, which means I don't have to pay you as much. So it's going to actually make things more difficult for workers. We'll get into that. There are some pieces of agricultural machinery that make commercial farming possible, including a guy named John Deere who invents, that's right, no, not the lawnmower, the steel plow. Deere's steel plow allows farmers in the West, especially in the West, in that Louisiana territory, to be able to carve through really compact, really hard soil. The soil in the Great Plains is incredibly fertile. It's the bottom of a prehistoric ocean, but it's like trying to plow through concrete. Deere's plow is lighter, it's stronger. You don't need an ox or a team of horses. You can get by with a horse to pull his plow. It's more durable. It allows you to plow more, which means plant more. There's a guy named Cyrus McCormick who invents a mechanical reaper. And McCormick's reaper allows you to harvest crops faster. So these new advances in farm machinery increase farm production. Now, during this time period, we also get improvements in the factory system. So commercial farming in the West, commercial farming in the South. Up in the North, factories. Geologically speaking, let's do our little earth science class right now. The northeastern part of the United States and traditionally has been the best place for factories. And one of the reasons early on was moving water. See, remember the earliest factories were not powered by steam, they were powered by water wheels. Steam will come along later. And the northeastern part of the U.S. has a very large number of fast-moving streams and rivers and waterfalls, and which means you can build your factory right there and have a water wheel to operate your factories. So you get Whitney with a system of interchangeable parts. You also get a guy named Samuel Slater. Samuel Slater came from England. Now the British protected their textile mills like they were national security things, like they were atomic secrets. You were not allowed to leave the country with any designs. So Slater memorized the plans, memorized the layouts of British textile mills, came to America and boom, give me a pencil. So now you have these textile mills, and textiles or clothing, they're going to become the big industry. So you have interchangeable parts, which means you don't need skilled labor, and you start to see a change in how work is done. Instead of the traditional days where the company owner trained an apprentice and you were working side by side and bumping elbows with your employer, now you have factories, workers were paid a wage, workers began to lose control over what they were producing, how hard they had to work, how much they worked, and these wages might be, you get paid by the piece you make, by the day, by the hour. And again, they're easier to replace. They have less leverage to negotiate with their employer. So the first big factory workers in the Northeast in America were young teenage girls. In Lowell, Massachusetts, they kind of had the model program. They would recruit girls from out in the farms, and they would recruit the families and say, hey, listen, send your daughter to Lowell. She's going to learn the value of hard work. She'll make some money. This money, she'll save up for her dowry. It'll make her a more attractive bride. And the Lowell girls, these teenage girls, would be exploited. They'd be bullied. There were stories of, if you were 1 minute late, you would be docked. So these girls would go eat lunch back in their dorms, and they would just, scarf the food. They'd get stomach problems because then they would have to sprint back. If they were so much as a minute late, they'd get docked for half the day. They wouldn't even button up their coats in the wintertime. Now, eventually, these young teenage girls would be replaced by another labor source, another cheap one. Because beginning, and especially in the 1840s, you had the Irish immigrants. And those Irish immigrants who come here because of the potato famine end up, again, because they're immigrants, they have less ability to speak up. They are not going to be viewed as sympathetic figures by the native-born Americans. In fact, it's going to lead to a term called nativism. And I need you to know that word. And from now on for the rest of your life, anytime you see or hear the word nativism, I want you to think, they took our jobs.
They took our job!
But you get the idea. Nativists were afraid that immigrants were going to come in and take their jobs, so they're going to be very prejudicial and discriminatory towards them. Not just the Irish, but eventually it's going to lead to German immigrants bearing the brunt of this nativism. And the German and Irish immigrants pre-Civil War, they were the two main immigrant groups. They were the biggest targets for the nativists. We'll see later on in American history it'll be the Italians, and we'll see the other groups. And there's always a group that nativists kind of lash out at. And it seems like it's that same argument all the time. Oh, they're going to take our jobs. Okay? Now, this market revolution is also going to lead to changes in families. I remember one time I asked my dad, Dad, can't we get a snowblower? He said, I have a snowblower. His name is Mike. Thanks, Dad. See, early in American history, children were like an economic asset. They were a farmhand. They were extra laborers. But now, as more and more people begin to work in the factories, children stop being an economic asset. They become a mouth to feed. They become more of an economic liability. And this market revolution spawns changes in the family structure. Mom's going to be home with the kids. She's not going to be bumping elbows and interacting as much with Dad as she used to be when, they were both running the family farm. Dad is working. Dad is either a guy on the factory floor. He's probably not the factory owner. If he's lucky, he's a middle management type. And so what's going to happen is, because you need these middle managers in the factories, it's going to lead to the creation of the middle class in America. And one of the things we're going to learn this year is that throughout American history, a lot of reform movements, big reform movements, come from the middle class. 2, because children are no longer an economic asset, they're a liability, family size begins to shrink. People have less kids. And the focus starts to become more and more on loving your children. You know, it's caring for the smaller numbers. And because dad is working in the factory and mom is at home, you start to get the evolution of this very sexist philosophy called the cult of domesticity.
The cult of personality.
And this cult of domesticity is huge. We have already talked this year about about Republican motherhood. Now you have the cult of domesticity. The idea that there are separate spheres, that the man's sphere is politics and money, and that the woman's sphere, her God-chosen occupation, is to take care of the house and take care of the children. Now, think about your mom. Think about any time your mom got riled up because she felt something was going on that was not fair to her children. I can think about my mom. That laser beam eye. You know, I like to make the joke that hell hath no fury like a soccer mama scorned.
Mama said knock you out.
And in this case, be careful what you ask for, America. You create this sexist cult of domesticity, and you tell women it's your God-given talent to care for the home and care for the children and to be responsible for their safety and the morality. Watch out what you ask for, because that means American women really start to dial in on anything they view as a threat. And American women, especially middle-class women, become the leaders in all kinds of major reform movements. Temperance, try to ban alcohol, the abolition of slavery, women's rights, public education, you name it. And these middle-class women lead the way. Thank you for the dramatic effect. All right, last thing that really helps tie in this whole idea of this market revolution. What's the point of making stuff if you can't ship it? And one of the things that kind of runs parallel with the market revolution is the transportation revolution. All kinds of changes in how we move. It starts off with in 1825 with the completion of the Erie Canal, which leads to a canal boom. Now prior to that, there had been a big movement in the 1790s and early 1800s to improve roads, the creation of crushed stone roads, of what were called plank roads, turnpikes, where if you wanted to use the road, you had to pay. A big bar would come down a turnpike, and you would pay a toll to use the road. Now, these internal improvements were not paid for by the national government. They were states, they were local governments, or sometimes even private companies. But this transportation revolution, especially the internal improvements, the canals, the roads, later on the railroads, they're going to help increase manifest destiny because they move on an east-west axis. They're going to primarily be in the north, which is going to lead to more sectionalism, more division between the north and the south. So this market revolution is going to help cause the Civil War. Henry Clay's American system, which we talked about last time. When you assign, hey, north, you're doing the factories, south, you're doing cash crops. It was designed to be economic nationalism by making us self-sufficient, but in reality what it did was, you took out the Sharpie, you drew the line. This is north, this is south. It increased the divisions. A guy named Robert Fulton invents the steamboat, which is going to revolutionize transportation on rivers. River transportation was easy if you were going with the river. But on the way back, you had to have somebody tow you by horse or mules. Now with Fulton, you have a powered vessel that can go against the current. You get better sailing vessels. You get, again, these national roads, these canals. But with the transportation changes, with the labor changes, with the economic changes, you get more sectionalism. The population of the north is going to skyrocket because all these Irish and German immigrants are going to come in. They're going to be the cheap, unskilled labor in the factories. They're going to move to the north because there's jobs there. They don't have job opportunities down the south because you've got slavery in the south, which is growing even bigger because of commercial farming, because of things like Eli Whitney's cotton gin. And so very quickly, these lines between North and South get drawn. And we're going to see in the coming classes how this sectionalism caused by the market revolution helps bring about the Civil War. The market revolution is going to lead to these family changes, especially with the middle class and middle class women, which will spur reform movements. And we're going to talk about the Second Great Awakening and all these antebellum or pre-war reforms, which really take off in the North and not so much in the South, especially since one of the big ones will be abolition of slavery. So again, this market revolution is going to lead to bringing us towards Civil War. So that's all the time we have for today. Until then, log off and put away your chromies, homies. I'll see you next time.